The year Marco's family was on the brink of bankruptcy. My father used a political marriage as a bargaining chip and arranged for me to marry Marco. At the time, I didn't know that he already had a childhood sweetheart, an unspoken fiancé. Later, my father was dragged into a scandal and his company fell into a financial crisis. Marco, however, brought his white moonlight love back home and said he wanted to compensate her with a grand wedding. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I simply packed my luggage in silence. Marco sneered. Stop playing these pathetic hard-to-get tricks. Do you still think you're some spoiled heiress? What he didn't know, I still had the divorce agreement he wrote when he was drunk, and in 7 days, my father and I would be leaving the country. Chapter 1. The day my father was sent by the group to an overseas branch, Marco brought his recently divorced first love back. He came into my room and informed me flatly, next week, I'll have Camila move in. I owe her far too much. No matter what you think, you'll have to accept it. My father had just stepped down from his position as CEO due to a workplace sexual harassment scandal. And Marco couldn't even wait a single day. I looked up at him. His eyes were as cold as an ice cellar in the dead of winter. There wasn't a trace of warmth to be found. 3 years of marriage, and I had never once made it into his heart. I turned my face away in panic, hiding the pain in my eyes. All right, it didn't matter anyway. I was leaving soon. Who he brought home no longer concerned me. Marco seemed a little surprised. His lips moved slightly, but in the end, he said nothing. He had always been a man of few words with me. After he left, I opened the safe and pulled out a stack of documents from beneath the jewelry box. It was the divorce agreement Marco had written for me 3 years ago. His signature and fingerprint were clearly on it. As long as we went to the civil affairs office to complete the formalities, we would have nothing to do with each other ever again. Chapter 2. 3 years ago, at a business banquet, I fell for the strikingly handsome Marco at first sight. Less than 3 days later, his family sent word that they were interested in a political marriage. I thought it was destiny. Until someone told me, Camila was getting married. That night, Marco drank himself into a stupor. I made him some hangover soup and brought it to the study. He was slumped over the desk, his eyes bloodshot, murmuring softly, Miranda. Warmth spread through my chest, and I hurried over to him. But he suddenly grabbed a glass from the desk and smashed it onto the floor, shards scattering everywhere, froze in shock and stumbled back 2 steps. The usually gentle and refined Marco clenched his teeth and hissed, Miranda, this is all your fault. If you hadn't set your sights on me, if you didn't have a CEO for a father, how could I have been forced to marry you? How could I have watched Camila marry someone else with my own eyes? His voice was filled with resentment. So that was it. The happy marriage I believed in was nothing more than a fantasy I had imposed on myself. The suffocation in my chest wouldn't rise or fall. Tears streamed down uncontrollably. Marco swayed to his feet, grabbed a pen, and scribbled his signature and fingerprint onto a divorce agreement. Then he tossed the flimsy sheet of paper at me. Coldly, he said, I want a divorce. I'm bringing Camila home to marry her. He was so drunk that he said things he never should have. I swallowed my emotions and said shakily, You're drunk. We'll talk after you sober up. I bent down, picked up the paper, turned around, and closed the door behind me. My tears fell like broken pearls, unstoppable. I returned to my room alone. The night wind was cold, yet it couldn't blow away my pain. The next day, after Marco sobered up, he returned to his usual polite and composed self. As for Camila, he never mentioned her again. Nor did he ever bring up divorce. Chapter 3. I pressed that divorce agreement to the very bottom of my vanity drawer. I lied to myself, thinking, Camila has just gotten married, Marco and I still have a chance. But Camila's marriage was unhappy. 2 months ago, Marco personally hired the most professional lawyers to help her file for divorce. Feeling sorry that she was all alone, he brought her to Jiang City and settled her there. And now, he was going to let her move into Marco's house. I was in the middle of taking stock of my assets when Marco walked in with Camila. When we got married, my father had given me a dowry worth 80 million. I needed to itemize everything, convert it into cash, and help my father's company survive the crisis. When Marco pushed the door open, I turned off my phone and stood up. He said, Camila wants this room. You move out. His tone was cold, leaving no room for discussion. After marrying Marco, he often worked late into the night. He said he was afraid of disturbing my rest and deliberately had me move out of the master bedroom, because this room was the closest to Marco's bedroom. The balcony was full of flowers, roses he had planted with his own hands. The terrace stood the swing we had set up when we were newlyweds. Camila hid behind him, cautiously peeking out, her eyes, filled with envy, looked around everywhere. I looked up and, for the first time, refused him. No, the house is huge. It's not like there's nowhere else to live. Why must it be this room? She tugged lightly at Marco's sleeve, looking somewhat aggrieved. Marco's face darkened. Because Camila likes it. These roses were meant for her in the first place. So, this place had been prepared for Camila from the very beginning. Camila smiled at me. Her smile was gentle, like the roses blooming on the balcony. I stared at her. Marco immediately pulled her behind him, his voice icy. Move out today. Be sensible. Don't embarrass everyone. I lowered my eyes and replied softly, all right. My father had fallen from power, and his company was in crisis. My strongest support was gone. Marco no longer needed to be polite to me. Before evening, I moved into a remote guest room. Then I took out the jewelry and designer bags Marco had given me and went to a luxury resale store to sell them. I had bought many things there before. So as soon as the sales associate saw me, she smiled and led me into a VIP room. I laid the items out one by one on the table. The first thing that caught my eye was the diamond ring he had given me when he proposed. Back then, he was deep in a bankruptcy crisis and spent all his savings to buy me this small yet exquisite ring. The second item was the Cartier bracelet he bought for me after his company went public. The third was the Tiffany necklace he gave me to apologize after losing control while drunk. I loved wearing that necklace when I went to see him. The crystal pendant sparkled under the sunlight, and he would smile and pull me into his arms, would say I was lively and adorable, different from those stiff, reserved girls. Chapter for the sales associate widened her eyes. Weren't these all gifts from Mr. Marco a few years ago? You really want to sell them? Yes, I said. I really do. She carefully examined the jewelry and bags and finally quoted me a price. I nodded in agreement. After receiving the money, I turned to leave. Outside was lively and bustling. I heard Marco's indulgent voice nearby. Do you like this necklace? Camila answered shyly, I do. Without another word, Marco swiped his card and bought it. As he paid, he looked up and saw me, surprise flickering in his eyes. His gaze fell on my empty finger. The diamond ring I never took off was gone. Marco put down the bank card, grabbed my hand, stared straight into my eyes, and asked, Miranda, where's your ring? I turned my head away, avoiding his gaze, and lied, I didn't wear it. His face darkened. His grip tightened, making me wince in pain. Camila hurriedly held his wrist. Marco, only then did he seem to wake from a dream. He let go and smiled dazedly at her. I lost my composure just now. Under the strange looks of the people around us, I left alone. On the sixth to last day before my departure, I was alone in my room organizing documents, and my mother-in-law called me over, urging me to hurry up and move out of the house. I made an excuse that I still had things to do and declined politely. Her expression changed instantly as she scolded me. You've been married for 3 years, and there's no movement in your belly. Are you really going to forbid my son from finding someone else? I lowered my head and answered, of course he can. He just needs to agree to divorce me first. Marco marrying his first love had nothing to do with me. After all, the divorce agreement was already signed. All that was left was to go with Marco to get the divorce certificate. I couldn't be bothered to argue. I brushed her off perfunctorily and blocked her words. On my way back to the room, I ran into Marco again. He was wearing a white shirt, handsome and upright, accompanying Camila for afternoon tea on the terrace. She wore the newly bought diamond necklace, smiling as she poured coffee for him. As she bent down, the necklace refracted dazzling light in the sunlight. Steaming coffee was poured into fine bone china cups, and their gazes intertwined through the mist. He always said he was busy with work, staying in the office all day. He had never done anything like this with me. I turned away quickly and hurried back to my room. My thoughts were in chaos. I couldn't focus on the documents in my hands at all. That love at first sight in my youth had trapped me for 3 whole years. Now I finally saw clearly, Marco was just going through the motions with me. With Camila, it was real love. I stared blankly at the documents until my secretary, Jessica, delivered the asset inventory report under my name. Madam, everything has been checked. Aside from the portion originally invested in the company, a few pieces of jewelry are missing. I suddenly looked up. Which ones? Chapter 5. Back then, my parents gave me too much dowry. I couldn't remember every single item, Jessica said. A diamond necklace. A wedding dress. A diamond necklace. I remembered seeing one around Camila's neck. I barged into Camila's room. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, trying on the wedding dress my mother had designed for me with her own hands. Her wedding with Marco was in 6 days. Far too rushed. I suspected Marco had already arranged everything in secret long ago. I just didn't expect she would dare put on that one-of-a-kind wedding dress. I was shaking with rage. I strode forward and grabbed the hem of the gown. The delicate lace and pearl embellishments tore loose under my fingers, scattering across the floor, yanked hard until the fabric let out the sound of ripping. She curled up in pain, forced to bend over. I'm sorry. I'll take it off right now. I clenched the dress in my fists, staring at her coldly. Camila stumbled and fell to the floor in front of the mirror. The gown was a mess, its skirt torn open in a huge ragged chunk, pearls and lace littering the ground. In her disheveled state, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Miranda, if you wanted me to take it off, you could have just said so. Why did you have to lay hands on me? I kept my face icy and nudged her with the tip of my shoe. You stole my wedding dress, and you still dare talk back? She lowered her head and only cried, like a fragile little innocent flower who had been wronged. Footsteps suddenly sounded behind me. Marco stormed in, shoved me aside, and swept Camila into his arms. I staggered back 2 steps, instinctively bracing myself against the vanity beside me to keep from falling. The wedding dress slipped from my hands to the floor, already ruined beyond repair. He looked at me, his eyes full of disgust and unfamiliarity, as if I were a stranger I had never met before. Miranda, I told you, I'm only trying to make up for what I lost back then. Why are you making things hard for her? A ball of fire clogged my chest. I couldn't speak. After a long moment, I forced out one sentence. That dress was designed by my mother for me. His voice was ice cold. It's just a piece of clothing. What's the harm in lending it to her for a few days? You'd rather tear it apart than let someone borrow it? Do you still think you're some rich little heiress? Enough. Know your place. I stood there. It was the season of warm breezes and blossoms, yet my whole body felt frozen. Marco always knew exactly where to stab. The dress couldn't be worn anymore. Camila leaned into Marco's arms, frowning. She shot a disgusted glance at the ruined gown. He soothed her gently. Don't worry. I'll order a new one right away. I promise it'll be ready in time for the wedding. I bent down, picked up the torn gown, and left in silence. It felt like someone had gripped my chest tight, so painful I could barely breathe. Just endure a few more days. Once the paperwork was done, I would leave. I had already converted most of my dowry, jewelry and property, into cash and stored it away. Marco ignored me all day until night came. He told me my father had been transferred to an overseas branch, leaving in 3 days, and my mother would go with him. Chapter 6. Marco stood by the doorway, backlit. His handsome face was hidden in shadow. Miranda, if you hadn't married me, you'd be a fallen heiress by now. I told you, Camila and I are just going through the motions, making up for the regret from back then. Your position as Mrs. Marco won't be shaken. I answered with silence. If it weren't for love at first sight back then, if my family had married into any of the other wealthy clans in Jeong City, I wouldn't have ended up here swallowing humiliation like this, seeing that I didn't speak. He pulled a diamond ring from his pocket and slammed it down onto the vanity. You lied to me. You sold it behind my back. He bit down hard on the word lied, clearly furious. I said flatly, I didn't want it anymore, so I sold it. What's the big deal? His brows knitted. My secretary said you've been selling off a lot of your dowry lately. He stared at me, gaze blazing. You don't wear jewelry, you don't show your face at events, what do you need all that money for? I met his eyes calmly. My father's been transferred. Overseas is far. We'll need money for everything. That part was true. Marco then took the items I'd sold and tossed them onto the vanity one by one. Jewelry clinked sharply as it struck the surface. His expression was storm dark. Everything I gave you, you sold it. Miranda, are you doing this to spite me? I lowered my head, straightened the necklace, and placed it back into the jewelry box. With a click, I shut the lid, then I'd just bring them abroad and sell them there. He couldn't control me that far away. I said softly, no, I wasn't trying to spite him. The things he gave me, I'd stopped caring a long time ago. Marco let out a cold laugh. Camila is the woman I was meant to spend my life with. You don't have the right to be jealous of her. Numbly, I replied, I know. Then let's divorce. His true love was Camila. They were the perfect match. He'd said it too many times. I was tired of hearing it. Silence filled the room. I continued with what I was doing, folding the formal dresses one by one. Once I went abroad, I'd never have to wear clothes this extravagant again. Seeing how unusually quiet I was today, Marco softened his tone. Leave these things to the servants. I tugged at the corner of my mouth perfunctorily and answered, all right. There were only 2 days left until Marco and Camila's wedding. The villa was hung with festive decorations. There were even some outside my remote room. I could see them just by opening the window. On the red banners was Marco's handwriting. Hand in hand, we'll grow old together, may I win one true heart, and never be parted till our hair turns white. Chapter 7. When Marco and I got married 3 years ago, we didn't have any of this. I stared out the window. Camila appeared at the far end of the corridor. She looked especially happy today, eyes curved with delight, steps light and quick as she walked toward me. The hem of her white wedding dress was like a soft, weightless cloud. She stopped in front of my door and said gently, Miranda, what kind of necklace do you think I should choose for the wedding? She was wearing the gown she had just tried on. Her hair wasn't styled yet, making her look like an innocent girl. I said, it's not your first wedding. Shouldn't you have experience? Why come ask me of all people? Her expression stiffened. Her face turned pale in an instant. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Marco came around the corner of the hallway at some point, his gaze icy. Miranda, you're a woman too. Why do you have to use the past to hurt her? Camila wanted to improve your relationship, so she came to discuss it with you on purpose. She was clearly here to show off, but Marco couldn't see it. All he saw was her. I stood in the doorway, looking down at her from above. Wear whatever necklace you like. Fine. I've answered you. You can go now. Her eyes reddened. She stepped back 2 paces and leaned against Marco, fragile and helpless. Marco frowned. Then he threatened me. Miranda, I can make it so your family's company never has a chance to recover. I looked at his face, bitterness spreading through my chest. My lips twitched stiffly, and I suddenly laughed until tears fell. Marco, you already signed the divorce agreement. He let out a cold laugh. If it weren't for the wedding being so close, I'd go with you right now and get the certificate. He was used to saying cruel things to me. Anything could come out of his mouth with ease. Leaning against the doorframe, I watched them walk away without a word. Camila looped her arm obediently through his, her face glowing with happiness. The crystal chandelier in the corridor cast a gentle light across their profiles. They looked perfect together. I took a deep breath. After steadying myself, I said to the servant beside me, have the car ready. Tomorrow, I'm going to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I returned to my room, took out the divorce agreement from the drawer, signed my name, and pressed my fingerprint. In one smooth motion. With both signatures and fingerprints, the procedure would be finished quickly. Now that my family had fallen, it was only natural for Marco to want to cut ties with me. The staff at the Civil Affairs Bureau didn't ask much. I also transferred my household registration back to my parents' family. By the time I finished everything and returned to the villa, it was almost noon. Tomorrow was the wedding. The entire villa was bustling. No one had the spare attention to care about me. Went back to my room and organized what I would take with me. I packed 2 suitcases, had someone send them out of the villa first, and then messaged my parents. A flight early tomorrow morning. The room had been cleaned spotless, as if no one had ever lived there. That evening, Marco's assistant brought me a formal dress. With her head lowered, she said, Mr. Marco asked me to deliver this to you, madam. The president personally chose the fabric 2 months ago. He said you can wear it tomorrow when you attend the wedding. The material was bespoke silk, gleaming softly under the warm yellow light. A servant in the room took the dress from her. Yet she still didn't leave. lingering at the doorway. Chapter 8 Mr. Marco asked me to pass on a message to you, madam. He said everything he said yesterday was said in anger. He hopes you won't take it to heart. Words, once spoken, were like water already spilled. The wound in my chest still throbbed faintly. I fell silent for a moment, then simply nodded to show that I'd heard her. She lifted her head, cautiously, and asked in a soft voice, Madam, is there anything you'd like me to tell Mr. Marco? The night wind was cold, making my eyes sting. I replied slowly, no. You should head back early and report in. She left quickly. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. On the day of Marco's wedding, I got up very early. At dawn, I changed into a low-key, plain-colored dress, put on my sunglasses, and went out. The butler still recognized me and casually asked, Where are you heading? The wedding will start in about an hour. Camila was about to become the lady of this house. And my divorce from Marco had long been a foregone conclusion. Make a distinction. He now addressed me by my full name. I just smiled. To the airport, to pick up my parents. No need to tell Marco. He nodded. Understood. I got into the car and headed toward the airport. All the wedding guests were traveling in the opposite direction toward the villa. I lowered the sun visor and stared blankly at my toes. 3 years ago, when I married Marco, we lived through a period of mutual courtesy and restraint. Back then, I was far too naive. I mistakenly believed that since Camila had already married someone else, and Marco had chosen me, our marriage could last. I naively thought that sincerity would earn me his response. Until a year ago, when Camila suddenly contacted him. After marrying me, the group's performance soared, and its market value multiplied several times over. I loved him. My father supported him. His career flourished, his future shone bright. He was even more high-spirited than when he first succeeded as an entrepreneur, but his white moonlight love was not doing well. After marriage, her husband kept a mistress. She lived in pain every single day. Only 25 years old, she was mentally and emotionally exhausted, growing thinner by the day. Unable to bear it anymore, she turned to her childhood sweetheart for comfort. Message after message filled with affection, phone call after phone call soaked in tears, yet the two lovers were separated by distance. Fate was cruel. She was the one who should have been Marco's wife. They should have gone from school uniforms to wedding gowns together. Because Marco felt guilty toward her, resentment grew in his heart toward me. So from that moment on, he began supporting her in secret while distancing himself from me. I think now, by the time I finally understood everything, it was already too late. Chapter 9 An hour later, I boarded a flight overseas. My parents knew I had already divorced Marco. They only sighed, regretting that they had misjudged him back then and caused me to endure so much pain. I pressed my lips together, not daring to speak. It was my own foolishness. One mistake after another, after more than 10 hours of travel, we finally arrived at my parents' home abroad. I had originally worried that I wouldn't adapt to the new environment. But aside from getting sick for a few days due to jet lag, I gradually adjusted. Mom planted flowers and fruit trees in the yard. The climate here was mild, everything grew well. Dad's position was marginal, and most of his previous savings had been frozen. Here, I lived easily, happily. I could eat fruits unavailable back home, see landscapes I'd never seen before. The sunlight and sea breeze here were refreshing and liberating, and I slowly fell in love with this life. Bit by bit, I forgot the past. All those moments spent with Marco blurred and faded. The rare tenderness. The fleeting joy. The long, lonely nights. The waiting that no one ever acknowledged. All of it drifted away with the wind, as if from another lifetime. After returning from the wedding of my father's friend's son, Mom held my hand and frowned slightly. I noticed you were spacing out just now. Were you thinking about him again? I paused, then answered honestly. I was thinking about how the steamed fish at the banquet was made. It tasted different from yours. She laughed softly. I'll have your dad ask tomorrow. I hugged her arm and rubbed against her coquettishly. Warmth and laughter filled the house. Chapter 10 Before the wedding began, Marco stood outside Miranda's door for a long time. He wanted to explain. This wedding was only meant to make up for the past he and Camila had lost in their youth. It was merely compensation for Camila. What he said about divorcing Miranda had been said in a moment of impulse. That had never been his true intention. He only wanted her to understand that at this moment, she could only rely on him. He didn't know when it had started, but he had grown used to hurting her with sharp words. Now, Marco was filled with regret. Regret for the cruel things he had said. Regret for stabbing her heart again and again. There was no movement inside the room, so he asked the butler, "Where is Madam?" The butler thought he was asking about Camila and replied, "Madam is getting her makeup done." Marco said, "All right." Yesterday, Marco had someone deliver a formal dress to Miranda. He had commissioned it 2 months ago. Whenever he saw something delicate and beautiful, he always thought of buying it for her. The pale pink color suited her perfectly. He imagined her wearing that dress, and the corners of his lips lifted unconsciously. But even when the wedding was about to begin, he still hadn't seen Miranda. His eyelid twitched. He asked again, "Where is Madam?" The butler lowered his head, his voice trembling. "Madam went to the airport early this morning to see the chairman off. It was time for the wedding." Marco ignored Camila behind him and rushed into the villa's guest room, pushing the door open. The room was so neat it made his heart panic, as if no one had ever lived there. Only the pale pink dress lay there quietly, untouched. Marco's heart plunged into an abyss. A tearing pain spread through his chest. She was really leaving him. Marco sprinted to the garage, jumped into a sports car, and shot out of the gate under the stunned gazes of the guests. Camila stumbled after him, the hem of her wedding dress dragging on the ground, tears blurring her makeup. "Marco, please don't go." He was the groom, the protagonist of this wedding. How could the protagonist be absent from his own wedding? Especially when this was the wedding he had longed for so many years. So she could only watch helplessly as the car disappeared from sight, her body collapsed onto the steps. Separated by thousands of miles overseas, she might never see him again. She covered her face with both hands, as tears slipped through her fingers. The sound of her broken sobbing pierced the heart. Everyone was stunned. The assistant rushed over in a panic. "Mr. Marco, what happened?" He couldn't say a word. Behind them, above the villa, fireworks that had been prepared a day in advance exploded across the blue sky. This should have been the happiest moment of his life. But Miranda was gone. His mind went blank, and only then did he finally understand. Camila was nothing more than an obsession he couldn't let go of from his youth. He had always believed he married Miranda only because of family pressure. That he should hate her. That he should distance himself from her. That he should make it up to Camila. Living together day after day, he never dared admit it. He had long since fallen deeply in love with Miranda. This very moment, Marco finally understood. Without Miranda, his life would lose all its color. Chapter 11. I thought I would stay abroad for a long time. But 2 years later, my father was reinstated as vice president of the group, and the internal crisis had already been resolved. Also won the sexual harassment lawsuit. The so-called scandal surrounding him vanished overnight. Those who helped my father find evidence weren't only my uncle, Marco was involved as well. When Marco was mentioned, my father's expression remained calm. He didn't even frown. To Marco, my father was both his former father-in-law and the benefactor who had helped him in his darkest hour. That he cared about my father's situation seemed, in a way, only natural. In spring, I returned to the country with my parents. The original villa had long been auctioned off, and my father moved us into a villa in the suburbs. The day Marco came to visit, a fine drizzle hung in the sky. He stood at the gate holding a black umbrella. Between us, the rain wove a thin curtain, like a veil of gauze. I remembered the first time I saw him, standing out among the crowd, exceptional in presence. Half hidden, half revealed, like a precious treasure. Time had passed. He had grown much thinner. The sharp edge he once had was gone. Now he was like deep water, quiet, unreadable. Seeing him again, my heartbeat was steady and calm. I stood under the eaves, hands in my pockets, lowered my head and asked, "What brings you here, Mr. Marco?" His voice was hoarse. "Miranda." The divorce was said in a moment of impulse. "I was just angry that you sold all the gifts I gave you." Chapter 12. I looked at him and spoke slowly. "Marco. You've said words like that twice. The first time, I deceived myself and hid the divorce agreement away. The second time, I gathered the courage to divorce you." His brows knitted tightly. Confusion flickered in his eyes, as if the memory were dissolving in his mind. After all, he had been drunk then. And that incident had already been 2 years ago. I said calmly, when you were drunk, you said it was all because of me that Camila married someone else. The divorce agreement was written by you at that time. 2 years ago, I took that agreement and finalized the divorce with you. Now we are complete strangers. If you're here to talk business with my father, I can pass along the message for you. His face turned deathly pale. His lips trembled as he forced out a few words, barely audible. Miranda, I came specifically to see you. In that case, there's nothing to talk about. I took a few steps back and closed the door. With that door, I shut out the entire outside world. The security guard later told me that Marco stayed outside all night, standing there without leaving. Until Camila came to look for him. The third day after my return, it happened to be the day of a charity auction hosted by a friend in our circle. I accompanied several familiar wives from the social circle to browse the exhibition. Camila was mixed in among the crowd as well. She looked gloomy, wearing plain jewelry, shrinking alone into a corner. No one wanted anything to do with her. Back then, Marco had made a huge spectacle of bringing her back home. Everyone knew her involvement in another person's marriage was no longer a secret. People around her avoided her, whispering privately, calling her a mistress who had driven me away. At such a formal event, she could only endure the cold stares alone. I paid her no attention and focused on the tiramisu in front of me. One of the ladies leaned over and muttered in my ear, from the wife of a spoiled rich boy to a high-level executive's wife, what more could she possibly want? I thought for a moment, then said, perhaps what she wants isn't just that. I handed Mrs. Lynn a macaron. She sat down and had afternoon tea with me. The sweet aroma of desserts spread through the air, adding a hint of warmth to the auction. That lady couldn't sit still. After a couple of bites, she ran off to take photos. At that moment, Camila quietly approached, her voice full of resentment. Miranda, all of this is your fault. I looked mildly puzzled. So now it's my fault again? I may be young and healthy, but I can't possibly shoulder this many responsibilities. She went on, if you hadn't married Marco back then, I could have been with him 5 years ago. I wouldn't have suffered so much, and he wouldn't still have you in his heart. And we wouldn't have ended up like this today, exhausted and sick of each other. I pressed my temple, a dull ache throbbing there. Chapter 13, why don't you blame him instead? That question left her speechless. I continued calmly, when Marco's family business was collapsing, even if he hadn't married me, he would have chosen someone else. He became the group's CEO at 27. That position is something countless people can't reach even after a lifetime of struggle. Top graduates from his own class are still working under him. If he had truly wanted to marry you, no one could have stopped him. He just couldn't let go of power and status. You should be grateful that the person he married was someone as easygoing as me. If it had been anyone else, the moment you sent him that first message, your affair would have been exposed to everyone. In truth, when Marco helped her escape that unhappy marriage, I had once felt relieved for her, happy that she had finally been freed from her suffering, but little by little, I lost any fondness for her. Because she was just like the old me, too naive. After finishing those words, I set down my dessert and prepared to leave. Her eyes reddened. She stood alone beside the flower beds, tears falling endlessly. I had a very pleasant time. That evening, when I got home, my mother told me that several people had asked friends to inquire about my marriage prospects. I said, I don't want to remarry. I'd already been through it once. There was nothing good about marriage, only endless complications. Managing the household. Supporting a husband's career. Thinking about having children. And if you misjudged the person, you'd only suffer even more. Being alone was easier, freer. My mother respected my decision and turned down all the introductions. At home, I helped my mother with daily life and occasionally went out with friends. Life was comfortable and unhurried. Marco kept sending me things. Sometimes limited edition luxury items, sometimes long handwritten letters. I returned everything, untouched. One ordinary evening, Camila suddenly came to see me. She had grown much thinner, looking utterly worn down. It was chilly outside, but I still let her in. With tear-filled eyes, she apologized. I really was too foolish before. Back then, I wronged you. I remained calm and handed her a pack of tissues. She said Marco was only keeping her financially. He often didn't come home. Alone in that mansion, ignored by everyone, she felt suffocated every day. Back then, Marco hadn't kept his promise to marry her. Now, he treated her with indifference as well. Sobbing, she said, "I hate him so much." I rested my chin in my hand and listened, unsure how to judge that relationship. As long as she didn't shift her resentment onto me, it was fine. Camila seemed to have been holding it in for a long time and poured everything out. I grew drowsy listening to her. At last, she asked cautiously, "Can you forgive me? I fought you for a man back then. I stole your husband and made you suffer. I really know I was wrong." I thought for a moment, then replied, "Whatever. When you fix my wedding dress, I'll forgive you." Chapter 14. Half a year later, Camila returned my wedding dress. The torn lace had been replaced with something even more delicate. The tiny pearls had been resewn one by professionals she hired. Every bit of damage had been restored. That was good. At least during those 6 months of repairing the dress, she wouldn't be too bored. She wouldn't spend all her days obsessing over whether Marco loved her or not. During that time, 2 major things happened. First, the woman who falsely accused my father of sexual harassment was sentenced, and my father returned to his position as CEO. Second, Marco made a disastrous decision. The board unanimously demanded his resignation, and he was transferred to the Southern Branch office. I wasn't surprised. From the moment he entered the business world, his rise had been too smooth. That kind of success easily breeds complacency, carelessness that leads to a hard fall. Before leaving, he came to see me again. Just like in the beginning. I stood on the marble steps of the mansion, looking down at him. He stood below, his posture restrained. Looking up at me, he said, "I'm going to Icheng. I might stay there for many years. Does that count as atonement?" I didn't like hearing it. "No. You ended up like this because of your own poor decisions. It has nothing to do with me." I turned and left. Camila was about to follow Marco south. Here, she was alone and isolated. I was the only one who came to see her off. She sat in an ordinary business car, rolled down the window, and looked at me. The light in her eyes was dim. I knew what she was worried about. Icheng's branch had long been rumored to be a dead end. Once you went there, it was hard to ever come back. This departure meant an uncertain future. I comforted her softly, "Don't worry too much. Icheng is actually quite nice. There's lots of fruit there, really good ones you can't find up north." She curved her lips into a small smile. Her gentleness and brightness reminded me of how she looked when we first met. Tears slid down from the corners of her eyes again. "Thank you, Miranda." I stayed in North City, studying, continuing my education. I earned an MBA and also learned flower arranging and oil painting. My father didn't stay at headquarters forever either. Later, he voluntarily applied to work at branch offices. I assisted him and traveled with him from place to place, seeing all the prosperity of the country, would never again get entangled in trivial matters. Marco achieved some success in Icheng as well, but we never met again. Years later, I received a message from Camila. After 10 years of marriage with Marco, she chose to end it. She was different from me. She had no family backing and could only rely on Marco at first. She had always been smart. Using Marco's resources, she quickly learned how to do business. Once she had her own career, she finally found the courage to leave the past behind and start an independent life. This was good. The road ahead is still long. We all have a chance to begin again.